Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your time zone, and welcome to another live episode of SOCcast by Arctic Wolf. My name is Jonathan Feddema, a senior technical trainer here at Arctic Wolf, and I am honored to be facilitating today's Zero Assumptions Roundtable discussion on data science and threat intelligence. Joining me today are two other members of Arctic Wolf's global pack. We have Irene Melgarejo Lermas, a data scientist working out of London, UK, and Markus Neis, a senior principal threat intelligence researcher working out of Zurich, Switzerland. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for taking the time today to chat with all of us about this very interesting topic. Of course, this is also a live discussion, so if anybody watching today has any questions, please feel free to throw those into the comments section on our chat, and Irene and Markus and I will be happy to talk about those and incorporate them into our conversation as we go. But maybe to start things off here, Markus and Irene, I'm wondering if the two of you could just give a little bit of an explanation for the folks at home and the folks watching and myself, what exactly data science is and what threat intelligence research is and how those two fields kind of differ. Feel free to share a little bit Feel free to share a bit of your own personal experience and how you kind of ended up in these fields as well, working here at Arctic Wolf. But yeah, what exactly is the difference between data science and threat intelligence research?
Maybe I can start. So data science is basically the art of gathering insights from data to help people make decisions. So in the cybersecurity field, this can be analyzing large volumes of data to find anomalies. That is called anomaly detection. It can be training models on curated data sets to try to predict if files are malicious or not. That is predictive ML. Or it can also span like more modern tools like LLMs to synthesize alerts and provide some context to threat analysts. So that's a little bit of what data science is in cybersecurity. And in my work, I have been working in this field for the last 3 years. And I'm mainly focused on predictive ML and a little bit of anomaly detection.
Okay. Very, very interesting. So it sounds like it would be very similar then to threat research, but Markus, maybe you can expand a bit on that, what exactly threat intelligence research is.
So I would say that my experience is probably kind of like sounds probably a little bit different, in particular on like the specific areas that I typically would look at, or people in my kind of like area are basically focusing on. The majority of the things that we look at is around adversary tradecraft. So that basically means like you're understanding the specific ways how they are conducting attacks, how they are using specific tools for achieving their objectives, using malware, but also typically you expand on like not only technical things, but rather you look at human fingerprints in terms of like understanding, for instance, like their preferences for using infrastructure, for instance, for conducting their attacks, right? So there's like a preference to some extent also for executing specific commands, right? So you might see that a threat actor actually uses, for instance, a specific term that is used in PowerShell, which is encoded command, and another actor might actually say, oh, that's far too long, I'm just doing this abbreviation for that. And they kind of like have their preferences. So you start to kind of like build out like pictures or profiles to basically start understanding that. And that is also, it's a lot of data to look at, but it doesn't obviously, as a human, scale in the way that Irene's work actually scales. So I basically just like have, I would say, a different aperture on the data that I take and look into, and then try to basically apply methods for understanding the data better, analyzing it, and finding specific things of interest that I can then further use for tracking adversaries, but also like building out detections, informing teams to tell them, hey, this is a new trend we want to look into. And that's basically, I would say, also the difference between the two of us.
Very interesting. Yeah. So if I'm following along here, then yeah, threat research is focused a lot on sort of the bad actors out there, the potential threats, the adversaries. You're collecting that intelligence, that understanding, so that again you can be applying that to cybersecurity initiatives here at Arctic Wolf or any other company doing something similar. Irene, it sounds like data science is more just working with data in general. It doesn't have necessarily that specific focus that Markus and his team would have, where they're looking for threats, they're looking for adversaries, they're looking for weaknesses. Data science is just studying data in general. But that point that you mentioned there, Markus, of the work that your team does, it doesn't really scale because there is so much data to comb through. I'm imagining this might be where we start to have our conversation about how data science and threat intelligence research can collaborate. So I'm curious to hear from both of you. How exactly did you two start working together, or how did data science and threat research start collaborating at Arctic Wolf, if you're familiar with how that came about?
So I would say there's always been a lot of collaboration between our teams. What we had to kind of like develop first was kind of like a pattern where we would basically identify what is the best outcome for the customer or for us as basically a company for leveraging both of the disciplines to make actually something useful out of that, right? So we want to kind of like solve a real world problem, and that's also, I would say, a lot where Irene's work where Irene basically fits in, because they are she's very targeted at like solving a real world problem, right? So and I think you also have something you can contribute to that conversation, how we were basically starting everything and then kind of like started to actually identify how we can actually create value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I think having an interdisciplinary team where you bring expertise from diverse areas so you have the most impact, I think that's really important. And one of the first projects that Markus and I worked on was to try to like improve on like a predictive model that I had built. And because of the collaboration and discussing potential pitfalls, like additional data sources, in the end, we got like a model that was more robust and it performed better. So like that's just an example of how that collaboration not only helps you find more impactful problems, but even the solutions that you have, it can make them better.
For sure. I'm wondering if you could dive a little deeper into that, Irene. Obviously, we need to protect the security of our customers and everything. But so this original predictive model, what was sort of the intention, or what was the overview of what that was trying to do, and then bringing Markus in to sort of add his expertise?
Yeah. So like, yeah, I cannot divulge much, but it was like a predictive model to do some domain classification. And so one of the very fresh perspective, like at least from a data science perspective, was the notion of like not trusting like your data sources completely. So for example, in domains, you have many sources that are like very popular domains that like you would assume, because things are not perfectly labeled, it's not a school problem or university problem where you have your perfectly labeled data and then you apply your data science and then you show your professor like, oh look, 99% of accuracy, you have like these real world issues that like it's not maybe top of mind from a data science perspective, but is that domains that are malicious could be one of the most most popular domains that people actually use. So if you go ahead and assume like popularity of a domain would make it seem more trustworthy, like that is some things that I had to learn from Markus, and like now I'm a little bit wiser. Yeah, so
It sounds almost like something out of a movie where you're talking about like you're in the world of university and everything is safe and secure, and now you're meeting with Markus, who's seen what's really happening in the real world, and he's providing this insight into you can't trust everything. These domains may be popular, but they're not necessarily safe. Is that accurate, Markus?
Yeah, I think we've kind of like discussed this kind of like bias very often, Irene and I, where we were kind of like, it's a phenomenon that's called like the streetlight effect, where you basically just like look at things that are in your reach, that you can see, because it's obviously something that is immediately available to you, and it takes a different perspective sometimes to actually start thinking about stuff that you are not necessarily seeing or even considering, right? So in this case, we basically can leverage our disciplines together, because I can kind of like have the conversation with Irene to say, hey, you know what? We have seen real threat actors in their tradecraft actually using domains that have a very old age to some extent, because it basically allows them to bypass traditional mechanisms that look for newly registered domains that have been kind of like spun up, right? So there's Nobelium, for instance, which is very well known for doing that, and it is a very interesting tradecraft as well, right? Because they know that they basically fly under the radar, because everybody's just like looking at stuff that is new, that is just like popping up in the environment. So it is something that you need to consider as an additional signal, but it's obviously not the only signal that you need to consider for incorporating, for instance, robustness into your detection mechanisms. And that's also something where I was thinking that is actually brilliant, that we can codify and describe basically these behaviors, and then we can replicate that by having Irene using that codification and re-implement that in her model, right? So the whole codification of that process is basically the power of actually preserving the logic and making it also sustainable against variations that you would otherwise have to rewrite in a signature, which is then it's very temporal, right? So the signature will not survive specific things by modifications, for instance. So by codifying that into a model, we got very successful, and that was a great outcome of the overall work that we kind of like had together.
Awesome. Yeah, while you were saying that, I was kind of wondering, like, to what extent are we able to be developing tools that can sort of have that longevity? Like, I would imagine, especially in your field there of threat intelligence research, the bad actors are constantly evolving. Things continue to change. It's not like they're using the same tools or the same backdoors over and over again. So it makes sense that you'd want to have a tool that can withstand variation. So, and I think that actually that segues very well into sort of the next point here that we wanted to talk about, was the impact of the collaboration between data science and threat research at Arctic Wolf. I think you already started to touch on it a bit there, Markus, of building this more powerful model that you're seeing a lot of success with. Maybe would the two of you like to expand on that a little bit? What kind of impact have you seen so far from the collaboration between your disciplines?
Yeah, Irene, want to take that?
Yeah, I think like an improvement on the solutions, and like kind of getting like different mindsets at the same time. Like I feel like Markus has a mindset of like, okay, how can this be broken into? Which is not like the first thought that from a data science comes. Data science perspective is, I have some data. How can I learn the data distribution really well? But we like as a collaboration, like I feel like both our mindsets have benefited from interacting with each other. Now, when I develop new models, I'm trying to think of, okay, what would Markus do? Like, what are the pitfalls of this? How can I evade? What am I lacking? Could there be any issue with my data, and trying to really keep security on top of my mind. And like I don't know, Markus, if like talking with more data scientists has shifted your mindset a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. So for me, it is also extremely valuable to have that collaboration for basically also learning to look at data with a different lens, right? So I mentioned this aperture in the beginning. So I kind of like would say that working with data science basically helps you to also start thinking about data from a different perspective, right? So oftentimes you look at it from the perspective of like, if I combine these two things, then I get more clarity. So like, let's say, for instance, like you have a detection that fires, which is, let's just come back to the example with like PowerShell. It has an encoded command in it, right? And then you get a tremendous amount of volume by just like looking at a single detection that has that. But then you might actually say, oh, maybe I actually have something more precise to look into that. So for instance, somebody actually adding code that downloads, for instance, additional code from a domain or from somewhere that is the next stage of like the payload, right? That's something you can codify quite well. But does that really bring in a lot of robustness, right? So I now ask myself, hey, how can I basically make this whole process that we have, for instance, more automated, and talk to somebody from data science to help me basically figure out what can I basically do with the data that I'm looking at for finding variations of that, finding obfuscation patterns that live inside of that, where the same behavior is seen, but there's obfuscation around that, right? So it gives you kind of like a different perspective for understanding the data better, and also asking different questions. Asking questions is extremely important when you are looking at these specific attacks, and understanding it better and faster, getting more context around that. That's why we basically started to actually expand and kind of like started to build out this collaboration that we have now implemented, and reach very great successes with that.
Right, and I imagine as well, like to some extent, again, your sort of experience in the mindset of you're looking at not to overly generalize here, but you're looking at more of these real world scenarios as opposed to Irene's kind of looking at data without the context of data. So you're really bringing in some of these insights or these thoughts into would it kind of help as well with prompting the tools, the LLMs that Irene is building. You're coming up with more detailed prompts on what you want to look for based on what you know is happening out there, as opposed to I'm just looking at data and I'm not really sure what it is or what it's for.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up something important, because that was initially we were actually talking about that quite frequently on like, hey, can we just like, for instance, throw that specific thing at an LLM? But also the collaboration with Irene and the data science team has kind of like introduced a lot of like ways of creating very specific models that are just they're designed for really great use cases that will first basically make the data useful, so that an LLM gets also value out of that. I don't think I should be talking about that. Irene, is probably your area. You want to kind of like add to that?
Yeah. So like LLMs are tools that are really popular right now. They're really like it's really exciting. It's really exciting moment to talk about this. But there is one of the issues in cybersecurity is basically the volume of data, and also the fact that you want like systems that react to threats in a real-time scale.
Right.
So there is two limitations with LLMs currently. It might change in the future, but one of them is they have a context window that is like limited. Like normally, like except like maybe the ones that are more massive are like 75,000 words, let's say. But we are dealing with scales and trying to find patterns in data sets of billions. per day. So if we tried to get an LLM and just without LLM per se, not LLM with agentic tools, which we can talk about later, but just an LLM.
Large language model.
Yeah, just large language model like chat, like some LLM alone. So one, it's not built to do statistics, like if it doesn't have an access to some statistic calculator. And second, it would just run out of the context window. So you cannot just feed this large volume. And that is without even taking into account the cost of feeding hundreds of thousands of tokens into the LLM. So that is one side of it. The other side is at the moment, there's also like a latency. The bigger these models are, if you try to get something on your LLM of choice and you say, please analyze this file, it takes like a minute for a response. So what happens is that if you relied alone on an LLM that has like a variety of tools to choose from at this moment, once you have a file that is malware in your computer and you have the LLM analyze it with its tool, it will take over a minute. By that time, your whole system is compromised.
Right.
So that is, yeah. And like the third part with LLMs is that they're massive. So normally you cannot put them in most devices. So if you build like very specific models, like we call these predictive models, like for example, what I mentioned, domain classification, file classifications, they fit in your device. So if you're not connected to the internet, like you can still be protected. And then like they're fast because like they're smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And they are basically like trained with data that is high quality. And so like the risk of hallucinations is slightly smaller. Like that part is, so it's very precise. It's almost like in the healthcare system, it's like a diagnostic tool.
Okay.
So like you have like maybe your specialist is your LLM. It can then like no matter how good your specialist is, it cannot measure your pulse better than like a blood pressure machine.
Right.
So it's like very specific. And so for specific things, you can get things that are very good in terms of like how little resource they consume. And for LLMs, you can always do things where like the unknowns, you have more complex problems. Maybe it requires like a diversity of tools. So like an LLM as a coordinator of like what tools to choose, like an specialist choosing what diagnostic tools to choose from, like that is an excellent use case. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I think if I'm following along here. So yeah, the predictive models that you're kind of working with your LLMs, is that kind of where Markus and his team really came in with that collaboration of this is what we kind of want to be focusing on. Again, taking that concept of a giant tool like an LLM and specifying its focus into useful channels.
So the first work that Markus and I worked on was on building like that specific model, that predictive model. So it wasn't using any LLM. So it was like a very specific for domain classification. So we had like a curated data set that we have put a lot of thought on. Like after like many discussions with Markus, like there was also like a review on like cleaning data, so statistical methods to have like very high quality and a specific classification that we had in mind. So like this model would quickly tell you this domain is this or this domain is that, and it's for a very specific use, very fast, and it can be used real time. Whereas like something where like an LLM, you ask, analyze this domain, it will take longer.
Right.
So like the real time application is going to be like that is like a risk. So
Yeah. Okay. And then that I assume that collaboration also helped to find then the additional use cases for your data science and for everything going on that end of like, okay, here are some similar scenarios. Let's build some additional predictive models, kind of focusing on these other focuses. Is that accurate?
So it is accurate, I would say. But what we are kind of like looking for, to be honest, is that we basically leverage like a cascading effect where you have, for instance, like the predictive models that Irene is building.
Yeah.
They're doing some really hard work to crunch through tremendous amount of data.
Yeah.
To find the needle in the haystack, right? And once you have the needle in the haystack, so you go, let's say we stick with that example from PowerShell that we had before.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at it from like the perspective of, you look at everything that has an encoded command invocation in it, that is going to be millions of hits on a daily basis. Now, an LLM is not, as Irene already pointed out, is not capable of actually looking into that and then telling you, hey, this is basically something that you want to investigate further. So the cascading effect basically comes from where you reduce that million events to something that becomes now meaningful. That is, for instance, like a reduction of all the things that have been found to be benign. Let's say we identified that already before. We
Right.
classified that. And then the remaining part is the subset of things which are interesting to investigate. So you go from millions of events down to 100 of events. That is something that an LLM can handle, right? So you now can basically say, oh, we can leverage now this cascading effect to say we reduce the volume. We now handle the rest to an LLM. The LLM basically looks at that and says, oh, there is that specific command line, there's that specific reach out, there's that specific obfuscation. All these things now kind of like you can handle them. So it's much better to actually feed that into a very specific LLM that has also been told then, hey, go and find if something is in that specific command line bad. And if it is bad, explain what it is, go deobfuscate it, right? So that's something that an LLM can handle and does work really well. And that was what we were aiming for, so that we can kind of like combine the, let's say, the scalability of what the machine learning models that Irene is building can handle, to then combine also with something that brings in the, let's say, expertise. We basically kind of like you can train an LLM to become an expert, probably much better in many things than what a human can do to some extent. And that's where we wanted to kind of like build out this whole process of making this useful, of kind of like bringing in this cascading effect. Did I forget anything, Irene? Is there anything you want to correct, please?
No, I think you touched on it really well. Like reducing the noise, reducing the volume there is like really important, so that then we can actually surface things that are of interest, and we can then use tools that are like with their proper resources constraints. Like as I mentioned before, you can just send everything to this model. It's not built for that. But if you have like a previous step where you do like anomaly detection, you do some baselining of your data to see what is normal, what is abnormal, then you are really like starting to reduce that volume to things that either can go to an LLM or they can go to security analysts, and it's a manageable size.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And you've both now mentioned a couple times kind of that scalability, or the challenge that we're facing here in cybersecurity with just the volume of data that you work with. So I believe that there is a slide that we wanted to share. There we can see there about some detection strategies. I'm wondering, Markus or Irene, could you talk a little bit about what our audience is seeing there in this slide with relation to the data scale challenges that we currently face?
Yeah, I can take that. So it's basically what you're seeing is kind of like the same concept. On the left side, this has been created by Jared Atkinson from SpectreOps, and it kind of like explains the detection spectrum. So on one side, you are on the very precise end. On the left, this has it does have a very interesting and sweet spot for finding very low false positives. But the downside is actually when you are very precise with your detections, you have an extremely high false negative rate. So you're missing a lot of things. And the same is also basically true when you are moving on the broad side. But now it reverses basically. You have a high false positive rate. So the example we had with like that PowerShell thing, or let's say, for instance, like you look at lolbin executions, the amount of high false positive, or the false positive rate, is going to be tremendously high.
Right.
On the other side, your false negative rate goes down, right? So if you're detecting on the right side, and that is what we are basically also representing on the image now on the right, where you are basically on the behavior part, right? So we were talking about that PowerShell encoded command. That is something that you see in benign software, for instance, happening all the time. You see lolbin executions happening in customers' environments all the time. You also see, for instance, or most of the TTPs, which are basically detecting which are being detected by just like looking at a specific method or implementation of a technique, that is going to be tremendously noisy. So that cascading effect we were talking about, right? So that's where we basically now can apply this finding the needle in the haystack on the right side to actually say, let's go through that tremendous amount of data, reduce that to a set that is manageable by using Irene's models, and then look at it also from a different lens. She mentioned anomalies, right? So how often do we see, for instance, like that somebody is executing a lolbin in the customer's environment? Does that user that regularly? Is this user connecting, for instance, from the same infrastructure always when they're doing cloud activities, right? So that's basically where that other capability that Irene can bring to the table, anomaly detection, starts to be added to this specific spectrum of unknowns, and all of a sudden you're starting to see things which are otherwise being basically missed or basically fly under the radar, and right. you're actually moving the things which are noisy from the right to the left side, because you're actually starting to become now more precise, obviously by reducing false negatives. That's the tremendous advantage of that. So yeah, we touched on anomaly detection. I think Irene probably can talk much more about that than I can on this.
Please, yeah, I'd love to learn a bit more, and I'm sure our audience would as well. What goes into anomaly detection for you day to day, Irene?
So it really depends on the problem that one is trying to solve. So if you go into trying to reduce the noise that you get, because you can apply like some clustering techniques to see a little bit of like, okay, these are really common, this is uncommon. So like some KNNs, if you're just have like a data set that it's only from benign data, you can use something like an isolation forest or like one vector machine, and then you kind of learn the borders of what is benign versus what is not benign. So there are like different routes to try and capture like what is out of distribution compared to what is in the distribution of the data. So I think like having this anomaly detection is a really good tool when you have like systems that capture like signals, but they're very high in false positives. So like that is like a great application for this kind of machine learning tooling. On the other hand, when you have like, for example, like this indicator or this rule-based, signature-based detection, like, oh, if this file has this particular signature, then we say, it's malicious. So that has very low false positive, but we miss a lot because new malware, they just keeps being introduced and slightly changed to avoid those signature based rules. It's easier to, if you have a fixed rule, it's easy to modify a little bit and try to evade it. So when I talked previously about these predictive models, what happens with these predictive models to try and classify if files are malware or not is that we literally use a massive data set of data that we have collected in the company, billions of files that we have clean labels for. And so we can really go in and learn the patterns, and these patterns generalize better because we are not explicitly hard coding what to look for, but the distribution will be similar over time. Even if there is a slight change, the slight change will probably well represented in the data set that we are learning from. So that is another way where that is another way how machine learning, these predictive models, are really applicable in the side of cybersecurity, because you want to have things that generalize a little bit better, that cannot be so easily evaded. Yeah.
Right. And I think if I'm following along, that is again just solidifying the importance of the collaboration between data science and threat research, in that, like you're saying, you want to have something that can generalize and sort of catch these things where there are these slight differences, something that would take humans just an insane amount of time to do. But you still need to have sort of that context from Markus and from threat research as to what are the signatures we're looking for? What are these kind of shifts, so that we can point these tools in the right direction, have them looking for the correct stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Part of the model is trained on these files, but what information about these files is relevant,
right,
to know if it's benign or malicious. That is where the threat researchers collaborate with us and tell us these are important things. And there are some things that are not, that are important. There are things that are just pure amount of data. So there is a combination, but definitely what data to look for is very, very important. And curating the correct data and tracking the right features, that's essential for data science.
right.
And so threat researchers really, really help on that. Yeah,
For sure. I'm wondering then about, again, the human expertise of this. Maybe there's something here you can speak to, Markus. What is kind of the relationship that you've been developing here with your team, and then with data science and these ML tools? As I think we're all kind of aware at this point, humans can't stay on top of all of these attacks on our own. They happen too quickly. There's too much data going on. It's constantly changing. But at the same time, I don't know that we're ready to just put machines into place to do that. As we've already been talking about, you need to have the machine pointed in the right direction. It needs to know what to look for. So what's the relationship between you and your team and sort of these models and these tools that data science, Irene and her team, have been developing?
So we already kind of said, for the human expertise is obviously something that doesn't scale really well, but the ML models scale extremely well. However, they have a shallow understanding of the data underneath, right? So that's basically the combination of these two things brings kind of extremely powerful outcomes. So if you kind of provide the knowledge basically for Irene and the data science team to go and implement that, the codification I was talking about,
Mm-hmm.
and you're basically starting to turn that into something that has a sustainable effect for you to create the output that you are also expecting. Now, the same is also, and Irene, you feel free to jump in. The same is also true to some extent for using LLMs for very targeted use cases, for instance, right? So you can definitely extremely effectively create content with an LLM, for instance, to write detections, for instance, to go and say, hey, go and actually collect information, go and research on a specific topic to provide me that specific data, right? So the LLMs are using tools underneath to actually do these tasks. And you need to spend time in actually prompting appropriately so that you get like the results that you're also expecting. However, this is also like where the downside is. You need to be continuously monitoring the outcomes and also identify if there are changes in what you are actually expecting when you are using an LLM for these specific tasks. You can get very precise output, but you also need, in the majority of cases, for most things, a human still to at least validate on a regular basis. So like quality controls, that's like a typical workflow anyway that you should have to identify if that is actually what you are expecting. And if not, go and figure out why it's not working, right? So even though you gain efficiency tremendously, however, you still need humans that will actually have the control over all the outputs, but also to basically tell the LLM what is expected from it and where you have specific areas of tuning, right? So you cannot just like simply point it to something and then say, oh, we are done now, right? So it's just like a continuous process.
Yeah, exactly. It would be nice if attackers only used one option, and then as soon as we cracked it, they just gave up. But no, they find the new thing. So yeah, that makes perfect sense to me that this is a continuous process. We need to continue to update and change and shift directions as your team kind of discovers or encounters the newest forms of attack. Fascinating.
Yeah, I feel like especially when the more critical a system is and the more it can like has the potential to have negative consequences, the more like a human in the loop like should be there to review the outputs of LLMs. And in terms of like how data scientists can be in the loop, if we can provide the tools that LLMs coordinate to then get information. So like if you need as an LLM assistant, you need to have some analysis stat or something to summarize like your information, which you cannot do because like of the context window I talked before. Like those tools need to be available, and like that needs to be codified in like how can an LLM then access some of those tools that the data scientists build. Yeah, and find the good, well, the closest you are to the limit of what is known in data science, the more you are in like data sets that are a little bit tricky, particular cases that like existing methods are not enough. Like at this moment, you still need a human in the loop to innovate and find a novel solution. So that is where like researchers in the data science teams, they are needed, and like you need to think creatively, maybe invent some new algorithm to deal with the specific use cases or the specific challenges of the domain you're working on. So that is one of the areas in which I expect like data scientists will need to be in the loop.
Right. Yeah. And this has me thinking as well. You mentioned a little while ago, Markus, the concept of the streetlight effect, which correct me if I'm off base on my definition here, but that's that concept of you're only really looking where you can see. That's the idea of a streetlight effect. You look where the streetlight is shining. You're not looking in the darkness around the streetlight effect. Did I get it? Did I get that correct?
Yeah, that's it.
Perfect. It has me thinking here, like you mentioned the creativity, Irene, of data scientists need to be creative in developing maybe new algorithms to find stuff. But again, if we take the streetlight effect into consideration here, data scientists need to know where to look. They can see this area, but this is where, again, threat researchers come in with their creativity of, oh, have you considered these potential attack vectors? Have you considered these techniques that might be used? And from that sort of gives your team the context of, oh, okay, so we need to think outside of the box here. We need to be developing something that we haven't already anticipated. Is that accurate? Have I done a decent job there of explaining the streetlight effect in terms of data science and threat research coming together?
Yeah, I think you did a neat job. I feel like Markus and I were both waiting for the others to say that you did a great job.
I should be directing my questions to somebody specifically. So, Markus, any other thoughts on that concept of the streetlight effect?
I was waiting to give my kind of like how to kind of like demonstrate how much I was impressed how well you framed that. So,
okay. Hopefully that also helps clarify things for our audience. I want to throw out there again, just for our audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to throw those in the comments, because we would be happy to talk about any of your questions you might have about this relationship between data science and threat research, and how that's something that's very important in today's cybersecurity landscape. Otherwise, I'm wondering, we may be sort of getting close to the end of our conversation here, as far as what Irene and Markus have sort of prepared to talk about. Is there anything else either of you two want to kind of highlight here? I had one small question just for my own understanding, as somebody who is adjacent to a lot of the work that you two do. I don't have the full understanding of cybersecurity. I'm wondering maybe some of our audience members might be in the same boat. I'm very familiar with the concept of a false positive. That's essentially where the system looks at something that is malicious and kind of determines, oh, you know what, that's actually okay, and that's how that gets through. False negative was something I hadn't heard before. Is that as simple as this is something that we flag as bad, but it is actually fine, it's benign?
It's something that you have not flagged at all, and is actually bad. So
Okay.
it's actually worse than a false positive.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And
yeah. So false positive is when they tell you this is malware, but it is not.
Right.
Yeah.
And the false negative is your system is infected and you don't know.
Oh, okay. I was way off. Well, then I'm glad that you were able to clarify that for me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, these are kind of, I think you kind of like have the same terms to some extent in data science, Irene, right? So it's like precision recall and all these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have similar like metrics, but to be honest, I am so used to doing models for cybersecurity use cases that I think more in terms of false positives and false negatives in my work right away. I really have shifted like the metrics that we use to evaluate our models, because in the end, what we want is to drive outcomes for cybersecurity. So no matter if like the recall or precision are better, what we actually want to do is minimize how many malicious stuff goes undetected, as well as like avoid alerting excessively and causing a lot of fatigue.
Yes.
So like those ones are like our in most cases are guiding metrics to determine the performance of our models. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, that's yeah, super interesting to know.
It sounds like your team has definitely had an impact then on Irene, ideally the rest of the data science team as well. You've conditioned them in some sense to be a little more suspicious of of the data. The university mindset has been dropped from Irene. She now
Yeah.
the rest of us where everything is suspicious.
Yeah, I'm not. Hopefully, I'm not as naive as a result of this collaboration.
Fantastic.
I think it is like also something where you literally need to have that collaboration to work towards that understanding on both ends, right? So it's not just that like, hey, you don't know that because you have not learned it. It's rather just like, right, so you have your very specific expertise that you are extremely good in. But then on the other side, we kind of like have this blend of like bringing in the knowledge from our expertise that we have gained, that becomes like the synergy where we can kind of like create these outcomes, right? So from the data perspective, there was never anything missing or anything wrong. It was just like, hey, this is another data set that is going to be important because of reason X, Y, and Z, right? So these two disciplines, they work together extremely well because in the end, like we mentioned that in the beginning, it's data that we are both looking at,
right,
but we are all looking at it from with a different lens and a different aperture. And now we are kind of like we're starting to share the same aperture and the same lens to look at it from a problem solving perspective.
I think that's a fantastic way to kind of summarize that, Markus. The idea that we're all bringing our own perspectives here. We all have our own unique talents, our unique areas of expertise, and it's by working together here, or as we like to say at Arctic Wolf, we are stronger together because we are bringing these different perspectives and combining them into something that we can then use to protect ourselves and our clients.
Awesome.
Yeah, I don't think there's a better way to kind of end than that great summaries. Thank you, Markus. So I know we would love to stay and chat more. This has actually been a lot of fun. You've got my brain now spinning about all sorts of other questions about large language models and machine learning. So I'm imagining we're going to have to schedule another one of these to dive into that, because I'd love to pick both of your brains about that. But we are just about out of time, so I don't think we can do that justice in 8 minutes. So I think we will wrap up here. Thank you again, Irene and Markus, for taking the time today. This was fascinating information. We've got a number of comments here. People just thanking you again for the information. They find it useful as well. Thank you to all of our wonderful audience members. We hope you found this engaging, maybe a little entertaining, hopefully very informative. We will be continuing this SOCcast live series, so look for more events like this one in your LinkedIn feeds or wherever else you may find it in the future. But for now, I think this is where we will sign off. Irene, Markus, any last things you'd like to say, or any shout outs you'd like to give to folks maybe watching at home?
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining, and I really appreciated having the conversation with you both, and looking forward to the next one.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you both. There was a great conversation, and I hope the viewers get some value from our insights.
Absolutely. Amazing. Well, thank you both again for one final time. And I think that's where we will wrap this up. So we will catch all of you again at the next SOCcast. But otherwise, have a good rest of your day, everybody. And we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.